This week on To the Contrary.
First, human trafficking from victim to survivor. Then, the first White House summit on working families. And an all-male panel at a women's summit?
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, modern-day slavery.
A new State Department report says 20 million people are being trafficked worldwide, mainly for sex. Last year, 44,000 were identified as survivors. The journey from victim to survivor is the theme of this year's report. It restates the U.S.'s commitment to stopping this depraved practice and assesses efforts by governments around the world to fight modern-day slavery. Trafficking survivor and advocate Elizabeth Corey says the report's helpful but could go further.
What I think that it doesn't do for us is focus so much on the domestic aspects of trafficking, which is something that I spend a lot of time talking about, that, you know, it isn't just happening in other countries. The TIP report is a very good start because we are looking to hold other countries accountable for trafficking, and that is positive. One of the things we need to start doing, I think, is start to put some of those monetary sanctions and whatnot into place in those countries who are not taking this seriously. I think that will take us to that next level of really pushing to end trafficking in the world.
The report categorizes the U.S. as a Tier 1 country, meaning we're among 31 countries doing the best job to fight trafficking. But to retain that status, advocates say more is needed. Recommendations include stop treating victims as criminals and collect data in a more comprehensive manner. This year, the report also focuses on how governments can help victims through their journey to become survivors.
So, Deborah Carnahan, are we doing enough? Is the U.S. doing enough to stop trafficking both here and abroad?
No, sadly, we're not. You know, we're taking good steps, but I think we need to start running towards a solution.
Yeah, considering this is a $9 billion plus industry in this country, clearly we're not doing enough.
People forget that the U.S., I think we approach this problem as such an international problem, but it's a huge problem domestically as well. It's a $9.5 billion industry in the U.S., and the U.S. is a major destination and transit country. So I think we need to emphasize more on the problems that we have at home.
Mm-hmm. One quick teller is that the U.S. annual budget on trafficking initiatives, both domestic and abroad, is equivalent to what we spend in a few hours on the war on drugs. I think there's a real problem with that, so we're absolutely not doing enough.
So why isn't Congress shifting money away from the war on drugs and towards trafficking?
Well, the war on drugs is a problem, too. I mean, this actually, I think, comes in as number 2 in this country. So you've got the war on drugs as first, and you've got trafficking as 2. So I'm not saying we take from that and put it here, but I think it shows perspective-wise what we're not doing. And I think more people are familiar with the war on drugs. They know somebody who maybe has been in that world.
Well, there's been so much media coverage for the last
it's been going on
30 years.
Right. And so much, I mean, I do think people know a lot more about human trafficking today than they did 10 years ago and 15 years ago in this country. So many great groups have done yeoman's work to bring it to light, but there's still work to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely on those points, and I think a lot of it is awareness. I mean, we're starting to do this now and become more aware. You didn't talk about this 10 years ago. It was something isolated that happened to girls in another country,
right.
Not in our
country.
It's
changing, you know, with the power of the internet and everything online now, the face of trafficking is changing. So I think people are adapting, activists are adapting, and the information is constantly changing. So, of course, the more we're aware, the more power we can have to fight it.
I mean, it's amazing to me, in this day and age, we ended slavery 150 years ago. We were late compared to like England and other Western countries, but now it's growing. I mean, it's growing again. It's just so hard
modern day
to get
slavery.
your hands around
young
that.
People also. I mean, these are children and young people.
Right, and it's the internet. The pimps and the traffickers have more access to more people with the internet.
It's giving them power. Yeah.
B, there's more transit. There's more.
Right.
American transit, there are more flights than there were 30, 40 years ago. It's easier to get in and out of places.
More people.
That's well, I mean, in this country alone, I mean, I know we don't want to get into a whole debate over immigration right now, but I mean, you see what's happening on our southern border, and so many of these children coming across without parents, without adult relatives. They're coming across with human smugglers in many cases, people their parents have actually hired. Good people don't go into the human smuggling business. Many of these are people that are from the drug cartels and other places. They may get these kids across the border, but who knows what happens to some of them. Some of them get promised other things once they get here, and they get sold off, basically, into human trafficking in this country.
Yeah, a lot of them actually get abused and raped.
That's right.
En route, because a lot of times the smugglers are the traffickers that will sell them into child prostitution and lots of illegal businesses.
So what's to be done? I mean, you talk about awareness. I think of like those 3 women who they weren't trafficked necessarily, but sort of they were, in Cleveland.
Captive, yes.
And that one neighbor reported seeing one of them in the backyard naked and not doing anything about it, not calling police. I mean, is that where we need to go next?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where we need to go. I'm not sure monetary sanctions are where we need to go.
To countries that aren't doing a good job.
When you start saying monetary sanctions, it gets a little difficult, and you start really playing with economics. But I think there should be encouragement, certainly, to other countries,
so
doesn't that mean with human rights.
Doesn't that mean monetary benefits?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would like to start somewhere else.
It could be diplomatic benefits.
Yeah, I mean, with encouragement, with holding summits and meetings and
let's
leaders.
Talk financial domestically for a moment. California has an innovative approach that's sort of underused right now. They have a statute that anybody caught buying sex from a young person, basically $25,000 fine. That's it. And that's a huge sum. So is this going to discourage men from buying sex?
Well, that's actually true. When I first started out as a prosecuting attorney, we were punishing the women, but we were not punishing the men that were asking for the women's services, and I thought that was really wrong.
But we're still
but there are about 20-something states that have safe harbor laws now,
so
which
that's changing.
Does not treat the trafficked, particularly underage girls who are trapped into this as criminals. They put them in programs to rehabilitate them and get them back into society.
Well, and I think, Bonnie, this is one reason. I mean, there is only so much government can do. I mean, because part of this is it's such an underground industry. It's not out in front of everybody. And I think it's the groups that are on the ground that are providing these kind of safe havens for predominantly women, but there are men that are trafficked into this as well. We should be supporting those groups. I mean, as individuals, as organizations. I mean, that's where I think we should be giving dollars if we can, because they're the ones who are getting
dollars,
these people out.
Or personal?
No, I'm saying my personal donation. I mean, these are the ones that are actually, I think, getting people out. They're the ones that have the networks. People know to come to them. They're the ones who I think can actually ultimately make the real difference.
Yeah. Well, and back to the point, though, about dollars. We can up the amount that we're spending on this. Okay, we can put a lot more money into this. We've spent a lot of money on the war of drugs, and it hasn't worked.
Right now, we're spending less than $30 million. I mean, that's nothing.
And apparently, the State Department
sex trafficking initiatives.
The
U.S. annual budget is under $30 million, and I know I've got some adversaries on the other side, but our defense budget, $526 billion. So comparatively, it's minuscule, and I think we can take a little bit and adjust. We have that.
Actually, some of the advocacy groups have even suggested that the State Department create a special department within state to actually oversee this, give it more funding so they can be empowered to.
I'll disagree with that, though. I think the states need to do more. While I appreciate the federal government's leadership, because it's an issue that clearly we all agree needs more addressing, but I think the states can do more. Again, going back to California.
Why not both?
Well, they can, but I think making the federal government to be a little bit more robust on this isn't always the answer.
It isn't always the answer, but you have states out there, a lot of poor states, a lot of states that have very limited resources and ability for extra law enforcement and for dealing with this. So I do think the federal government needs to take a leadership role in this.
The local, federal, if you see anything, say something to the police. Let us know what you think, and please follow me on Twitter at @BonnieOrBay. From fighting trafficking to improving working conditions. The White House is convening business leaders, work-life proponents, and government officials to address work-life issues, which are critical to parents trying to raise kids and excel in today's workplace. Valerie Jarrett, senior advisor to President Obama, told me it's time for the 21st century workplace to reflect the needs of the 21st century worker.
Women are now nearly half of the workforce. 2/3 of all families are either headed by a single woman head of household or two breadwinners. And so a woman's contribution to the family income is more important than ever before. And at the time that our U.S. companies are trying to be globally competitive, it's extremely important that they attract and retain the best talent they can. And so you don't want to leave half of the talent on the sidelines.
Ahead of this summit, the White House held 4 regional work-life forums across the country. 4 themes kept coming up over and over again.
The importance of workplace flexibility, the importance of making sure that people have a reasonable minimum wage so that no one is raising their children in poverty, the importance of daycare. There was a recent study that came out that said within a 3-month period, 29% of working parents have a daycare crisis. So just imagine what happens if your daycare falls through, if you have a sick child, if you have a sick parent. And so the importance of paid leave also was an important issue that came up.
Jarrett says there's research that proves worker-friendly policies keep companies competitive despite the threat of cheaper labor abroad.
Investments in the workforce today may be expensive in the short term, but they pay off in the long run. Our Council on Economic Advisors did a study a few years ago that they will be updating that shows that companies, for example, that have workplace flexibility initiatives tend to be more profitable. They tend to retain their workers. Their workers are happier and therefore more loyal. And so the productivity goes up and the profitability goes up.
Jarrett says we can expect to hear from businesses about their best practices. She also promises some surprises as the federal government takes a leadership role implementing progressive labor policies.
We want to lead by example here at the federal government, and so we'll be announcing some steps that we intend to take as well. And it's all designed to build a 21st century workplace that works for every employer and works for every employee.
So using this conference, will the Obama administration, along with congressional Democrats, be able to apply pressure to push some of these things they'd like to see into law, like paid family leave, like federally subsidized daycare, like a federal minimum wage increase?
Well, I certainly hope not. Listen, I think worker flexibility is a great thing. I think you see a lot more employers offering it today than you did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And the reason is because it retains a good workforce and it attracts new talent wanting to come in. But I think you could take a step too far when the government comes in and starts mandating all of these things. And the reality is, especially under this administration, we've had mandate after mandate, whether it be health care like Obamacare and other regulations, and you've got fewer workers today, people either working or looking for jobs, I'm talking men and women, than we've had since 1978 in this country. So I would argue that's not a good thing for anybody looking for a job or wanting to get a good job. And I think a lot of that has to do with the regulations that we're putting on businesses. And this is more of it. You can talk about the importance of flexibility, but mandating it isn't very flexible in the end game.
But something needs to happen. I mean, Think Progress released this map recently, and it was called Mapping Paid Maternity Leave. And the U.S. is the only industrialized country in the world without national paid leave. And something needs to change. Our policies need to start reflecting our changing workforce. It just isn't, they're not complementing each other anymore. And there's no reason. I feel like, I am a working mother, and it's so hard. People make it so hard. I feel like you have a child and everybody has to fend for themselves. You kind of have to create your own situation that supports your family, and it's not fair. You are really punished almost for having a child and continuing to work.
The tough thing is here is how to maintain, let the companies be competitive while having these laws and these regulations that are fair to them. I think that's the real crux of the matter here, is how do these companies, small businesses particularly, remain competitive in today's globally competitive workplace.
But this is affecting our economy. I mean, good family policies is good business. It's good for the economy. Take care of your workforce.
Quick question, though. I think most of these federal laws, if they were able to push them through, I'm not sure about minimum wage. You would know better, but certainly paid leave and all those sorts of things only apply to companies of 50 or over. They don't apply to really small businesses.
Yeah, the really small businesses.
I mean, if you're a 100-person business, you're still a small business compared to,
exactly,
Procter and Gamble or something. But you're not a.
Well, under 50, they're suffering because of other mandates put through by this administration. But I'll argue that yes, you're right. I mean, I think paid family leave is something we can all get on board with. When we're talking about raising the minimum wage, though, I'm not for what this administration is doing. I'm thinking we need an increase, but we've got to be realistic and not have it be something that's astronomical.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say, I'm going to plug my husband here, that he was always on Working Mothers Magazine's issue every year that he was in Congress for having one of the best practices on maternity leave and paid leave, and we had people work
You mean
from home.
in his office or voting for laws?
No, in his office. And actually we had probably one of the most progressive, along with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and a few others, on the Hill. I've also had my own business. And I've had children, and it's very, very difficult. And I don't see why a business would not want to retain a good worker, do paid maternity leave for the man or the woman so that you can come back and be a productive worker and not have to leave. I don't understand why you wouldn't do that.
Well, so let me, you put in a plug for your husband, I'll put in a plug for the Heritage Foundation where I work.
I think that's a little lopsided.
Very many people would know a conservative organization. We provide all that, you know, and if it's the guy that's working there and his wife's having the baby, he gets to take time off. I mean,
how many of them do?
Almost everyone I know does. I don't know anybody yet who hasn't.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know anybody yet that hasn't.
As much time as
he may not take off like a full 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but many of them take off they take off weeks. And like I said, I don't know one that hasn't. But my point is, Heritage does that because we want to retain good talent. We want the people coming in to want to work there. We provide really good health care. Why? We care about our employees, but also because we want to retain people. So I think businesses need to be able to be competitive here. And that's one thing as an employee looking around, you can say, you know what? Those folks have really good benefits. Those folks don't provide that. What kind of environment do I want to be in?
More employers need to be like that, though. I feel like the employers don't want to make the change. And what are they scared of?
Well, why don't we look at Walmart? I mean, let's start kind of right on the bottom there. Seriously. I mean, they hardly provide anything at all. I mean, not even a sustainable, livable wage for their workers who are on food stamps. And Walmart is being subsidized by the government because the government is paying their employees to help them live.
But
so you're saying then that if there were federal mandates,
right? So to Genevieve's point, I don't see without the federal mandates companies, large employers like Walmart, changing their practices and offering that to their employees.
Well, my question would be, though, I think Walmart probably does offer that to certain levels of employees, but some people coming at the bottom level. And look, let's be clear. Not everybody who works at Walmart is raising their family. I love the debate that we had in D.C. when Walmart opened here, and the government was trying to shut it down, saying you can't come in unless you pay a certain amount. And the people of D.C. who wanted these extra jobs were like, excuse me, let me make that decision on my own. I'd like to work at this company. So why don't we let people make those choices as opposed to forcing businesses to all look exactly the same in terms of their benefits?
Right, well, I would then argue that a company like Walmart that won't do that none of their employees then should get any type of federal benefits whatsoever. Food stamps, medical assistance, nothing. Because that is what's happening.
Why?
The worker's going, excuse me, I want that job. But then the worker probably is also needing some federal government tax dollars to help them so Walmart can make their profits.
It could also just be somebody, this is an extra income for them. They're not the sole provider. Everybody's not the same who goes into every single job.
You were going to say.
I have a huge problem with Walmart, and I agree. And I think a lot of these times people are going into their jobs.
It's the same people. It's the same people who are. I would think this. The people who want the jobs are probably very
people
similar
that need the jobs. Right?
No, to people who need the jobs are similar to the people who shop there in the sense that it's
cycle of exploitation.
Lower income level. And the reason they shop there is because it's cheaper, and the reason it's cheaper is because they're getting away with not giving their employees benefits. So it seems like a very vicious cycle. But anyway, now a controversial image from a women's summit.
Take a look at this panel at the 2014 Global Summit of Women, an annual coming together of powerful corporate and government women. Some women's rights advocates were originally outraged that a male-only panel presented at this summit. But some feminists say it's a step in the right direction. The all-male panel discussed how their histories of recruiting and supporting female talent led to financial success. These men, who are CEOs of banks, energy companies, and law firms, are encouraging more men to participate with women to promote gender equity.
So, what are your thoughts on this?
I thought that this was great. I think any time that we take a moment to kind of reach across the aisles, I think the women's rights movement has so much emphasis on the history of women's oppression. We forget that men are our most important and greatest allies. And I actually thought this was great because what these men are actually demonstrating is that feminism is good for business.
Yeah, what's wrong with actually saying, hey, this is going well, why don't we highlight that? As opposed to, like you're saying, we've got to pretend that men don't exist or they're still always the bad guys. They're not. I think it's just great to have.
Well, is there too much I remember, men have been getting more involved in the women's movement, in feminism, in promoting women in companies and leadership roles of all kinds, I would say for the last 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I remember the very first guy I encountered, dealing with this show, who wanted to get on the show because he was a man, boosting women. And my thought at the time, and again, we're talking 90s sometime, was, why are you doing, this is a women's movement. But now I'm thinking women will never get to where they need to be unless men are on board.
It's like educating and talking to women about women's rights. Even if you don't have necessarily a background in this kind of advocacy, you're aware, so it's like we need to stop telling ourselves about what we need.
I think it's like any movement, don't you, Bonnie? You had to have people who were white getting involved in the civil rights movement, so they could move that movement further along. I don't see anything wrong with having men support you in what you need.
What about when men want to take leadership roles in the women's movement?
It's kind of like the argument about go to an all-girls school, right? Because then you don't have men competing with you for those leadership positions. I don't know that I'll let them have a leadership position, but they can certainly have a supporting role.
Now more than ever, women's issues affect everyone across the board. And I think it's great to have, again, like you said, these allies who are really there, not because they're pressured to be on this panel. To those women who criticize this all-male picture, I say, how dare they? Yeah. If these men want to get up on stage and show that women's issues impact their companies and they're cognizant of that and they want to act on that, then we need them.
But isn't for women, the normal grassroots woman who's not involved in the women's movement maybe clearly believes she deserves better rights, but they're not aware, they're not following it closely, and they may see something like this and say that's kind of silly to have men.
I think the average woman actually likes men.
And
I think they're often turned off by women who only want to act like they're for women and that they're almost anti-male in some ways. Yeah. And I'm not saying everybody in the feminist movement does, but a lot do.
Well, I think there was a time, Gloria Steinem, who is a great
man-hating feminist days are.
The bicycle.
That was 1960-something.
Well, I know, but
that is 80 years old, and she...
I know.
Okay,
I wish her happy birthday this year.
She has said a lot since then, but...
We still have trouble getting a bill through Congress for equal pay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have trouble getting equal pay, but we won't get into that discussion.
I'm still getting paid
or on something even a little less controversial in terms of the Violence Against Women's Act. Against Women Act.
I'd say a great number of Republicans have an issue with that because of funding, and I think
didn't every single Republican vote against the Violence Against Women Act?
Every single one.
Which is a bit sad as a Republican who actually was a women's studies minor in college and did my thesis on Wawa and loved it. I read Our Bodies, Ourselves many times. But I grew up in a very, very odd home where I was a mix. And I'll tell you, though, I think...
A mix of what and what?
A mix of Democrat, Republican, Independent, everything. We were libertarians, I'll be honest. So the problem is funding, right? How do you fund these initiatives and how do you prioritize them? And I think that's what we're struggling with in Congress today. That's what I know a number of Republicans are grappling with. Where do I put this? Well, I think this summit, which has an all-male panel, to the average woman, I think it says, look, men actually care about women because they know, like Valerie Jarrett said, that we're half of the workforce now. You can't deny it anymore. You've got to pay attention to the issues.
Women's issues
I hope
are
it slides up the scale, and I hope we can responsibly fund these initiatives at all levels.
And you were saying, not getting a bill through about equal pay. Well, what about the National Women's History Museum,
which two men,
that first of all, they're not even asking the African American History Museum, which is going to be a wonderful thing. It's well deserved, but Congress was able to find $250 million and give them a space on the mall. The Women's History Museum comes along, and they won't even allow them to buy.
But they don't want public dollars.
Well, they said it because they knew they weren't going to get it. Is the point?
Yes.
And it's amazing to me that Congress will get behind, a major minority group, of course, not just, but but not behind a women's museum.
Right.
It makes no sense to me.
Very telling, and it makes no sense to you because it doesn't make sense. That's why.
At least to this part of the table.
Okay. All right. And that's it. What a note to go out on. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.
Then they swap.
Then they swap? Seriously?